Hi y'all, I'm Robert, you know me as a culinary arts tutor. Uh, I've been here for quite a while and I'm just here to kind of help y'all kind of retouch on some of the things that you're going to be experiencing during the finals, or at least the math portion of it. So, some of the so for the final, there's going to be a couple things that almost every single class is going to use. And for conversions, that's pretty much going to be something that you're going to see in almost every single final that you take within this program. So, for the conversions, one of the biggest things you're going to have to remember is the working factor. And the working factor is the number used to change the recipe. So let's say that if you're working with a recipe going from 4 servings to 16 servings, you're going to have to find out how much you're going to have to multiply all the other ingredients to be able to change that recipe from the smaller recipe to the bigger recipe. And in this case it would be 4, because 4 times 4 is equal to 16. And so that's how you'd find it. You always find the working factor by dividing the new recipe, that serving size, by the old recipe serving size. So 16 divided by 4, which is equal to 4. Now, whenever you're dealing with recipe conversions, you're going to be making more likely than not, you're going to be making the ingredients in the recipes bigger. So say you're using 2 tablespoons in the same example that I used before. If we're making it into a recipe with 16 servings, it's going to be multiplied by 4. So those 2 tablespoons now become 4 tablespoons. And whenever we start working with that, you have to start breaking it down to smaller units. So something to really help with that and to help breaking it down is memorizing the basic unit conversions. And those being, of course, just the original 3 teaspoons is equal to 1 tablespoon, 2 tablespoons is equal to 1 ounce, 8 ounces is equal to 1 cup, 2 cups is equal to 1 pint, 2 pints is equal to 1 quart, and 4 quarts is equal to gallon. Now, besides working with volume, you're also going to be working with weight, so it's also going to be a good idea to remember that 16 ounces is equal to 1 pound. And these are going to be the basic conversions that you're going to be using to break down the recipe. So as before, we said that it was 8 tablespoons for the new recipe. We'd of course break it down because it's a lot more efficient to use bigger measurements instead of using 8 individual teaspoons whenever we're actually making the recipe. So in this case, the 8 tablespoons will then be broken down to ounces. So divide the 8 by the 2 to find out how many ounces it is, and that would be 4 ounces. Or later on, you can just change. You can leave it as 4 ounces or just change it to half a cup. Depends on the actual conversion itself or the recipe itself. So that's going to be something that you're going to be seeing in almost every single test. The second thing that you're going to be seeing pretty common, not in every final, but at least 80% of the finals that you're going to be working with, you're going to see a good chunk of cost cards. Now, for the cost cards, it's a bit more tricky, but it's mostly just a lot of repetition. So some of the things that you need to remember for cost cards is that when you're breaking down the recipes for the recipe costs, that you're going to be wanting down to the recipe, the unit used in the recipe. So say if you're in your inventory, it says that it's going to be, say, olive oil. It's going to be 6 gallons of olive oil, but you only need about a tablespoon in the recipe. So for the recipe, that means that you're going to have to break down the cost for 1 tablespoon and find out how much the tablespoon costs rather than using the gallons. So you're always going to want to break it down to the unit using the recipe. So whenever you're finding out how much the unit costs, you're always going to divide the cost by the total amount of units within the inventory sheet. Despite all that, once you start getting all that and the extension costs, that's when you're starting to get into the last part, which I know a lot of the time confuses a good chunk of y'all. So for the very first thing that you're going to be doing for the bottom part is going to be the total ingredient cost. The total ingredient cost is pretty much just all the extension costs that you got throughout the recipe and just adding them all together. And that's going to be the total ingredient cost. The spice factor is also something that's a bit more trickier. And we always tell you that spice factor is 5%. Pretty much what that means is that you're going to be multiplying the total ingredient cost by 0.05, and that in and of itself is the spice factor. The spice factor is the one including, say, measurements that are too small to really include or measure out. Things like salt or some of the spices, pepper, those are usually one of the more common things that tend to go there. So besides that, I already went over what the total ingredient costs. Oh, so the total, right after the spice factor, the total is the total ingredient cost plus the spice factor. You just add those two together, easy peasy. And then some of this, I realize that some of y'all are actually forgetting to do, is the portion. The portion is also very easy. It's just the total divided by the serving size. The serving size is usually right at the very top of the recipe. It can either be anywhere between like 2 servings to Usually not more than 20 servings, but you always want to double check. It's usually in italics right there on top, right either below or beside the recipe name. Now, for the very last part, and this is actually mostly just going to be in the meats class where you're going to be tested on, is the prep list. Now, certain things about the prep list that you have to remember, or at least little tips that I like to give out, is that whenever you're writing on the prep list, whenever you're reading the recipes, to make sure that you write down more or less how much each steps take, or like how much time each step takes. Like say the first 3 steps are going to take about 10 minutes cumulatively, but then maybe the last couple steps we're actually putting something in the oven might take close to about an hour for actual baking. So it's always a good idea to write down the time it's going to take for each step, so you can more or less check what you're going to be doing and what you're going to be prioritizing as you cook. So whenever you're writing on the prep list, you're always going to want to think about what's taking the longest. You're going to be putting something in the oven and it's going to have to be roasting for about 3 hours. You definitely know you want to do that in the very beginning of your timesheets, or not timesheets, but the prep list. You know you're going to want to be doing that first. Well, you're going to be saving something like, say, a sauce that just really asks for you to mix all the ingredients together. You're going to know that you're going to be doing that in the very last, because it's literally just grabbing the ingredients and putting them together. So another thing that you'd want to think about whenever you're doing the prep list is think about what you're going to be doing as some things cook or proof or rest passively. So say if you're making a dough and you usually need to let dough rise for maybe about 20-30 minutes, you know that you're going to be wanting to do something in between those 20 and 30 minutes rather than just twiddling your thumbs. You're going to be either wanting to be cleaning your station, getting the ingredients ready for the next recipe that you're going to be doing after you get that dough ready, or maybe just chopping the ingredients or that you're going to be needing for the rest of the recipe. You're going to be wanting to do something as that stuff is being done, and that's what I mean whenever it says something is being done passively. So these are going to be the 3 big things that you're going to be seeing in a good chunk of your tests, and so it's a good thing to memorize, or at least remember these basics so far. So it's going to be crunch time pretty soon. You got just this week, and then next week is final week. I'm going to be available this week and next week throughout the finals. If you also need any help with any exams, if you need a study buddy, or if you just want to retouch on some of the things that I talked about today or talk more into depth about it. My hours being Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock, and then Friday as well from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays from 12:30 to 5 o'clock. So if you need to see me or ask any questions, or maybe just get some advice about what you might be seeing throughout the test, you can go ahead and come over and just come over to my room 128, and if just in case you need any help. Good luck on y'all's exams.